Jed York just said that there's no one he trusts more to get the 49ers back on track than Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch. Does he really believe that? More importantly, do you believe that? We'll talk about it next on the Gold Standard Podcast, brought to you by BetUS Sportsbook and Casino. What is good, everybody? Welcome to the original Gold Standard Podcast. I'm your host, Rob Stats Guerrera. He's your co-host, Levin Black. Levin, it's Tuesday night. The offseason is officially here. There's no more football until September.
Why do you have to start with such a downer? Like, what are we going to do now? Show's over, everybody. There's no recovering. We're done.
Yeah, that's no fun. Actually, it's not September. It's before that because there's preseason and stuff. But I'm going.
I don't care about preseason.
I'm going through it a little bit. Not gonna lie. I love football. I will miss it very, very much, especially because I really don't have anything to look forward to because my Mariners are an abomination of a sports franchise. But nonetheless, we are here on today's
Wednesday show to look forward to every week. What are you talking about?
Right.
Get you through.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. I'm sure you'll just be the wind beneath my wings.
I have been for 6 years now.
Okay, that is doing some liberal interpretations.
I'm the wind beneath the wings, and Michelle's one wing, and Jason and Steph are another wing, and the energy to flap your wings and fly is Vish.
Well,
you bring a face,
and I'm the guy that posts all the stuff and does all that. There is that part of it. Your voices don't just vanish.
You handle the landing.
Gee. The landing's the most important part. If you screw up the landing, you die, okay? The landing, any idiot can fly. The landing is the most important part.
I don't know. There's plenty of Disney cartoons from our youth that showed that the landing was not important.
Tailspin. Launchpad couldn't land anything. He was terrible.
That was Darkwing Duck.
He was on Tailspin too.
No, he was not.
Launchpad McQuack
was not on Tailspin.
I beg to differ.
Launchpad McQuack was on DuckTales and Darkwing Duck.
Oh, Google AI says you're wrong, my friend. Launchpad McQuack is a character in the Disney animated series DuckTales and Tailspin. He's Scrooge McDuck's pilot in DuckTales and a character in Tailspin.
I have seen every episode of Tailspin about 15 dozen times.
You will not dispute the Google, okay? How dare you? You've sidetracked the entire first part of the show, but since you're going to be insistent about it, there it is. Launchpad, McQuack, Tailspin. Just
I would have to see if it is. It's like a single episode, but I don't remember that episode at all. I do remember him being in DuckTales.
Just be wrong. You were right, Rob. That's all I need to hear from you.
No, until I find verifiable proof. Google AI, which is in its infancy, it is not verifiable proof, by the way.
Regardless, let's move on to 49ers business, shall we?
Best 90s Disney cartoon. Come on,
chat. Hit us up. Although Darkwing Duck is high on the list. We're here to answer a very simple question because Jed York has been doing some talking. There was a whole thing celebrating Super Bowl 60 being in Levi Stadium. Of course, Jed was there. And, he was talking to reporters. And one of the things he said to the reporters was, there's no one I trust more than John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan to get us back on track. So that's the question we asked today. Do you trust Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch to get the 49ers back on track, Levin?
Well, I take trust as I can turn my back and I know it will be good, right? I don't know that I could say that. Do I think that they can turn it around? Yes. Do I trust them? Meaning that I think they definitely will? No. There's certainly a chance that they screw this up. I do not have nearly as much confidence as I did 2 years ago, a year ago. I think that they have had a hard time saying goodbye to players that they once counted on.
Well, that's a key part of this, right? Because like any remodel, you can't put in the new stuff until you rip out the old stuff. And the Niners have to do a little demolition. Now it looks like Deebo Samuel is helping them getting that started. Matt Mayoko, I listened to his podcast, and he really pounded home this idea that Deebo Samuel has somehow let the 49ers off the hook by requesting a trade, and that they dodge now some sort of backlash or criticism from somewhere that the team would get if they just decided to trade an unproductive player on their own. I really don't quite understand that. Like, why are you worried? You're within your rights to trade anybody. This franchise traded Joe Montana, for God's sakes. Like, we really worried that there would be some sort of backlash from trading Deebo?
I don't get the reverence that a lot of fans have for Deebo. What Deebo has been for the 49ers is a crazy, super perfect example of players that fan bases end up hating, right? No, I'm serious. Like, he checks every box. What is he? A 1-year wonder. Fans hate when you didn't do greatness, and then your contract year you did greatness, and you went right back to being mediocre. That's what he did. On top of that, you have questions about his effort, where he takes plays off. On top of that, you have critical mistakes and big moments. On top of that, you have the entire game plan revolving around him, and it has failed on the biggest stage multiple times. On top of that, you have him being extremely vocal and trying to have this diva personality that is completely undeserving. Sorry, you're not good enough to be able to do that. You can't pull off being a diva if you're not putting up the numbers, right?
Mm-hmm.
And yet he still wants to blame everybody but himself. The guy is not capable of looking at a mirror. That is the exact type of person that fans grow to despise on a team. Way overpaid and only performs in a contract year. And yet it's still, like, I would say 75% of fans going, no, I like him. And you might have half the fan base saying that they understand why they have to move on. Like, some of those people still want him to stay here, that understand why it's time to move on. But you do not have a majority looking at him as saying, that is a guy that's paid too much. We have to move on.
And, we still don't know if Deebo's actually going to be traded, right? Like, they don't have to do anything with Deebo. He's under contract. They could keep him around.
I will make a bold prediction. He is not going to be traded. He will be released.
You don't think he's going to be on the roster?
No, with every single time my mind goes back to this situation and I look at the numbers again, and I've done this 3 or 4 times. Every time I look at it, I just go, there's no way they're trading him, because nobody's going to offer a draft pick high enough that is valuable enough to the 49ers to not do the post June 1st cut, because they can save so much money on the cap doing that.
But what you mean when you say valuable enough to the 49ers is really to Kyle. And that's why this goes back to, do you trust Kyle and John Lynch to rebuild the 49ers? Because
no, I say valuable as in, I think that's a John Lynch situation where Kyle, I think, will go out, and if they come back with a trade, he'll say, look, I want him, he's done a lot for us. I want him to go where he wants. And it'll be John Lynch that steps in and goes, hold on here. Trading him is going to cost us more than $15 million in cap space. And if we just cut him, we will save, a $20 million swing in terms of cap space that they will have this offseason.
I was listening to Tim Kawakami and Matt Barrows on the 49ers Plus Minus podcast, and they kind of, I can't remember which one specifically did this, so I apologize. I don't want to put words in either one of their mouth, but the conversation was basically that there is essentially a split in the 49ers front office, that Jed and Parag are done with Deebo. They want to be out of the Deebo business, and that it's mostly Kyle and maybe John Lynch that still like Deebo and, maybe don't want to get rid of him, or maybe aren't aligned with that other vision. And so that's why this is a test for Kyle Shanahan. Even if you like him, you have to get rid of him. And Kyle has to recognize that. And if we get to a point where Kyle just has his favorite guys and he cannot objectively view the roster and make the best decisions for the franchise as a whole, then he can't be trusted to rebuild the 49ers.
There needs to be a voice of reason amongst those two, right? Now, if the report is correct, you do have to wonder if this is one of the rare cases where the voice of reason will be Jed York, that he comes in and says, "No, I'm not saying figure it out. I'm saying you will get rid of him. Come March, what is it, 22nd, that big bonus is due? It could be Jed York draws a line in the sand and says, "You have until March 21st to find a trade that you guys both agree is worth doing, or he will be cut." There is no scenario that he remains on this team.
And Jed has not really, as far as we know, he has not done that. In fact, from what I sort of understood, that basically Kyle is the one that sort of got Deebo's contract restructured in September, and Kyle is the one that ultimately pushed for them not to trade Brandon Ayuk, when they had a deal. Like, they had a deal, but Kyle said, "Hey, excuse me, I really want to do this." And Jed, gave him the latitude to do it. I don't want a meddling owner, but I don't hate the idea of someone saying, "Kyle, this just doesn't make any sense." I'm reading Mike Silver's book now, all about Shanahan and McVay and Saleh and, the whole crew there, Raheem Morris. And one kind of thing that I'm picking up on is that there's a lot of things that Kyle Shanahan had to adjust as he went through his coaching career. And to his credit, he's been open to all of them once they've been suggested, and he's embraced them. But they've all had to be suggested and brought to him by someone more powerful than he was at the time. Now, there is no one more powerful than Kyle Shanahan in the 49ers organization. It's Jed York, but only if he chooses to exercise that power. And to this point, as far as we know, he really hasn't. So if that's the case, how is Kyle going to make the necessary changes? Maybe John Lynch can persuade him, but that's a tall ask because John works for Kyle.
There are people out there. I mean, that is a not uncommon type of person that have, I guess I would call it ego of, if you're not on my level or above in terms of hierarchy, you can't teach me anything. You know what I mean? That is a type of person. And maybe Kyle is that type of person, that he is so used to listening to this person that held such great power, meaning his father, that the environment in which he grew up and all the knowledge that he gained came from this person that was so much higher than him, that he thinks nobody can teach him anything unless they are on par with him or above. That is a possibility. And I would say that John Lynch is somebody that he listens to because John Lynch is a Hall of Famer. So that's somebody that has that credibility that Kyle will be like, okay, I'll listen. You know what I mean? But maybe nobody underneath him. I mean, that is something that I would not be surprised at all to hear, that Kyle dismisses all the people underneath him.
I was trying to toss that in my mind because I'm trying to read this book and I'm trying to think, like, do I need to adjust some of what I thought about Kyle Shanahan as I learn more about him, as I learn more about his upbringing and all of that stuff?
You need to adjust how you talk to me.
Yeah, I should be a lot meaner.
Yeah, you probably should.
So I'm trying to, because one of the things I hate is that when people have their takes, and they have their take no matter what, and regardless of any new information that comes in, they keep their original take. I don't want to be that. So I'm trying to read this book with an open mind. I do think that there is some of that, like, hey, I know more than you type of stuff. But also, he's been with Lynch for 8 years, and Lynch is a Hall of Famer. And so he has that sort of built-in equity that I think could be helpful in this rebuilding project. I think that John probably is comfortable enough with Kyle by this point to be like, hey, this is wrong. I think you're making a mistake. Okay. Steve says the only thing Stats adjusts is his microphone. I know. I fiddle with the microphone a lot. I can't help it. I do that. I'm aware of it. I can't stop it. Okay. It's out of my control. One of my things. So yeah, I think that he has that equity. And that's another reason I'm excited that Robert Saleh is back, Levin, because Saleh has that history with Shanahan. And we know they've battled in the past. And so maybe it's the kind of thing where, yes, I trust Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch to rebuild the 49ers, but I trust them a lot more with some guardrails. And Robert Saleh could be one of those guardrails.
Yeah. I mean, it's not that I'm like super anti Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch. It's that I would say 2 years ago for sure, I would have had near 100% confidence, like about as much confidence as you can get in that they would make the right decision. But I think there started to be a hint of doubt with the Jimmy Garoppolo situation when they just could not let go. And with that being the kind of eye-opening of let me watch this and see if they can let go of somebody, and I have yet to see it. There's not a single player that was a extremely valuable part of this team that they have been willing to let go while they were, I guess Eric Armstead would be the first one. And I don't count DeForest Buckner before you go there. Because one, their hands were forced. Yeah, it wasn't their choice.
They didn't draft him, and it wasn't that like he was just like, I'm not signing this deal, so you have to get rid of me.
You could say it that way because they didn't draft Armstead either. There's not been a single player that they brought in that they counted on at one point in time, and then they have been willing to say, that's not somebody we can count on anymore.
And they would have kept Armstead if he had taken the pay cut. Now, I think that Armstead, if he had taken the pay cut, I think it would have been a good idea to keep him. So, like, I don't disagree with that thinking. But the point remains, like you said, we haven't seen them have to get rid of these guys yet. You know, they've built it up, and right now they're still like Kyle Shanahan 49ers version 1.0, and they need to get off of that. And this is the test of this offseason, I think, is a test of like, are they willing to actually do it? What's going to happen with Kyle Juszczyk? They already asked him to take a pay cut last year. Will they do it again? If he says no, will they cut him? Like, will they actually do it? I want to know. I think that this offseason will tell us a lot in terms of what they're willing to do and how they look at it. Because I have always heard about Kyle that he was cold, that he was calculating with the roster, that he was like Belichick, where he would, if he didn't think you were valuable, you were gone. But we have not seen evidence of that. So
I think that's true unless you become one of his true like inner circle guys.
Yeah.
He is cold towards certain players. It's been, I don't care, immediately gone, right? But once you get to the level where it's like you're a captain, you are counted on, then I think he has a hard time seeing reality that they're not that guy anymore. Deebo is not 2021 Deebo. He's not even 2023 Deebo. Mm-hmm. He's getting worse, not better.
And it's obvious. That's the thing. It is obvious. So if we can see it, he should be able to see it. And we're going to find out if he can. I would love to hear, more from Kyle about this now. Because remember, the first time Deebo requested a trade, Kyle was like, we'll work it out. And they were like, why are you so confident? And he was like, because I know my relationship with Deebo. And he was right. They worked it out and we moved on. So I would love to hear from Kyle, like, hey, are you going to try to work this out? Or are you like, where do you stand on this? What's your reaction to all of this? Kyle's, I'm assuming, not going to go to the combine. He hasn't gone in the last couple of years. John Lynch, I believe, will be at the combine. He'll speak as he always does. So hopefully we'll get, his reaction to that and maybe find out a little bit more about Kyle. John, he's always going to give you that 30 seconds of pure, unvarnished truth that probably shouldn't leave his mouth, but it always seems to at some point. So hopefully we get some answers in a couple of weeks at the combine.
I will be interested to see what comes out once the whole Deebo situation is handled. Mm-hmm. Because if it doesn't come out, there was a lot of teams interested, then, I would be less surprised if it came out that no team was interested over, half the league was interested. You know what I mean? I don't think he has a whole lot of suitors. Because the reality is he can't get open. And the reality is when you scout the 49ers, you see that, right?
It's obvious.
And so other teams got to be looking at it as, yes, the guy is great when he has the ball in his hands, but he is a diminishing asset at this point. And we're not sure he's that difference maker anymore. And boy, does he like to be very vocal in the media and speak his mind. And he is already saying that basically he still wants to get the star level treatment, and he's not that guy. So that it becomes, if I was an opposing GM or coach, I would say I don't want it, because it's clear the guy thinks he's a star and wants the targets of a star, and he's not that guy. If we bring him in, we're bringing him in because he's cheap in terms of what the acquiring team has to pay. He would be cheap, and it's a 1-year rental to see what he still has. That's not the situation that you bring in a guy that's sitting in the media saying that it's not my fault. The team failed me, and won't look in the mirror. It's just not, it's those two things don't match up, right? Acquiring teams looking for a 1-year, boy, I hope we hit the lottery and this guy flashes again, over the player saying I'm a star and I need to go somewhere that treats me like one.
Daza0187, YouTube channel member, says, I trust John. I just think Kyle is far too stubborn to evolve enough for the 49ers to succeed. So that's another thing that I'm learning about Kyle as I read this book. And again, it's written by Mike Silver. And so, he's very close with the Shanahan family. So I'm trying to take everything with a grain of salt. But a lot of what I'm reading in this book matches up with the reality of what we know happened. Like, they did evolve. Like, he's evolved throughout his whole coaching career. First, he started and he was, in Tampa Bay, and he was with John Gruden. And then he went and sat in the defensive meeting rooms, and he learned about defense, and he changed his offense then. Then he went to the Texans with Gary Kubiak, and he took some of what Gary Kubiak was doing there, and he combined it with some of the stuff John Gruden had taught him in this other stop to create something new. Then he went to Washington, right? And they were going to run all this stuff. And then what happened? RG3 gets dropped into their lap, and they have to make a completely new offense for RG3 because he's coming from Baylor. He had never taken a snap under center in his life. So they made up a completely new offense for RG3. So he has evolved throughout his career. The question is, has that continued with the 49ers? I think it has. I think if you look at how they used Deebo in 2021, that was different. If you look at what they did with McCaffrey once he got there, if you look at what they tried to do with Trey Lance, it didn't work, but they tried it. I think the offense is still evolving.
I don't think it's involved in 3+ years. The offense that they're running is still the same offense in 3 years. And 3 years is basically a decade in the NFL. You know what I mean? 3 years is enough for the entire league to shift what works. And he is still running the same offense he ran 3 years ago.
But like, when you say the same offense, what do you mean? You mean he hasn't put in any new plays? Like, what specifically, what's your evidence for that?
Yeah, I think he's still stubbornly trying to run these outside zone schemes when it was not working. Like, he was still, and I was ranting about it in our instant reactions, that he's still, hey, my offensive line sucks and can't hold a block. Let me go ahead and try to run to the outside and get tackled for a loss rather than just go up the middle and try to get a couple of yards. It was still, the pass game was, we got to get Deebo the ball. Let's run some wide receiver screens. Let's run the end around to Deebo. We still see the juice leak out, which works 1 out of 4 times. And yes, it's great when it works, but it only works 1 out of 4 times. I don't think it's evolved. He still runs the intermediate routes with the X receiver, and that's what they run. They're going to run a lot of posts and out routes 10 yards deep. It's the same offense. Yes, there are very minor tweaks. Nobody runs identical, but the amount of tweaks he's made is virtually nothing compared to the rest of the NFL. Literally, the Ravens have evolved into completely new offense in that time, yet had the same player that makes it work.
Yeah, but they had different offensive coordinators.
Yeah, it's important to have change.
Well, they had change because they didn't get it done. Like, they had change because in some of the biggest moments, mostly playoff games, Lamar has sort of struggled, or their offensive coordinators have gotten promoted. But I think that, like, I think that fans kind of want Kyle to, like, come out and run the wishbone, and then they could be like, oh, his offense is evolving, and, like, that's not what it's going to be.
But like you said that he changed things when Christian McCaffrey got there. Did he? Or was it just he got a really good running back to run the same running plays that were succeeding before, and now they succeed more because it's a better running back? And now when Christian McCaffrey runs and is sitting there for the dump off or a short out, it's Christian freaking McCaffrey, so the quarterback's actually looking at it.
No, I think they did evolve. I think they put the running back in the slot way more. Remember, Raheem Mostert was not in the slot. Raheem Mostert was not running the pass routes that Christian McCaffrey was running. They weren't doing that with Matt Breida. They weren't doing that. They got McCaffrey, and they just freaking stepped on the gas, man. They put him in the slot. I think they took some stuff from Carolina. Again, I think we all want more obvious changes so we could point to it and be like, see, that's a new formation they've never used before or something like that. And I don't think that that's what it's going to be ever. And I don't think it should be because their offense, even with all their issues last year, was still like 4th in yards in the entire league.
Yeah, well, I think their issue on offense is got 75% to do with an issue of thinking you can run long developing pass plays and outside zone scheme and not invest anything into your offensive line. It's like, okay, you want to run the longest developing of everything. The hardest run plays are the outside zone because your freaking offensive linemen have to be capable of pulling and blocking while they're sprinting to get to the outside, right? Like you're literally devising the hardest scheme for an offensive lineman to hold up in. And yet you say, give me all the bargain players on the offensive line other than Trent Williams. It doesn't compute. And I will say that has destroyed a lot of it. The Eagles' offense succeeds because their offensive line destroys everybody. That's why they're able to succeed. Yes, they have some good players, but I think that if the Eagles had the offensive line of the 49ers, I don't think they even made the NFC Championship game because Saquon Barkley would have been a good, not great running back. Jalen Hurts would have been getting sacked a lot more. He would not have been able to escape nearly as much. That offense would have been much worse. The offensive line is 75% of the issue, but I do think that Kyle has not been nearly as inventive. I think he has been extremely stubborn with what he runs, and he keeps running similar things and doesn't change it up. And he still has an issue of if it's not working in the first quarter, he goes, that's our game plan. We can't change it.
So I want to read you an excerpt from the Silver Book, and it's from Joe Thomas talking about why he liked Kyle Shanahan's offense. And what Joe Thomas said was, it really changed the game because I put the offense back at the advantage where you could ask all 11 guys to do something that wasn't that hard, and it gave them an advantage as long as they were able to pay attention to the detail. And he said similar things in the past about the offensive line, how essentially the angles and stuff that they get asked to block at make it easier for offensive linemen. So you don't need to have 5 all-pros on the offensive line in order for them to do what they need to do. I think the problem is that they've only been looking for guys that can do the bare minimum, so that when they fall short of that, when they misevaluate and end up with guys that can't hit that aiming point, it's so low that what you're left with is Jake Brendel in 2024 or Aaron Banks, who seemingly, took a big step backward. He was never this bad in previous years, but he regressed. And so that's what you're left at. And so I feel like the real change just needs to be look for good offensive linemen. And then if you miss, you end up with average offensive linemen.
Well, I think there's importance to kind of break that down. What is easier for an offensive lineman? Getting to run and get ahead of steam, right? That gives them the advantage. What makes a matchup be a lot more talent based on who wins? Saying we're going to just push forward and try to shove them out of the way, right? That's what, like, Philly does that. Philly has a massive offensive line, so they say we're just going to bully the ever living shit out of you, and they can do it. But you got to have the talent to do that, because if you go truly face to face with a Nick Bosa, you got to be able to hold up. But if you pull and the guy that's in front of Nick Bosa ignores Nick Bosa and sprints this way and has a head of steam to hit the guy that was next to Nick Bosa that's now running this way and can't see him and doesn't have a perfect angle to try to win that matchup anymore, that's easier for an offensive lineman. But this is what I would say, and look, I'm not an offensive line expert. The more you're moving, the easier it is for a gap to form and give a pathway for a defender to blow the play up. And when you have such a lack of talent on the offensive line, those gaps are going to come. And I think that's what's happening with the 49ers is you're having one of those guys make a critical mistake every single play to where the plays are getting blown up a lot more than they should be. And it's because what they're being forced to do is something that they got to execute while running. And if they don't get to the right spot at the right time, the whole play is destroyed. So it's harder, but easier. I don't know exactly how to put it.
Well, it's like I always say, right? It's like a clock. If all the parts are doing what they're supposed to be doing, it runs like a friggin' machine. But if the one part is wrong, the whole operation can fall apart. And that's a lot of the times what you see with some of those outside zone run plays. Daza0187, YouTube channel member, thank you for the super chat, says the top teams in the league have elite offensive lines. When has Kyle significantly invested in the offensive line? Kyle persists with making the offense run through Deebo. I do think that they've tried to invest in the offensive line. They drafted Mike McGlinchey, top 10. They traded for Trent Williams. They signed Weston Richburg to a giant contract. Unfortunately, he got hurt. He was playing well. Then he got hurt. Then they signed Alex Mack. They invested a second-round pick in Aaron Banks. That is investment. Unfortunately, some of the other guys didn't really work out. But, I mean, they have invested. Those are investments.
I mean, I think that's not enough investment for the amount of years they've been here. You're talking about they traded for Trent Williams. They drafted Mike McGlinchey in the top 10. They spent a huge contract on Weston Richburg. All of those are 7 years ago, 6+ years ago. That's not investing. Those don't count anymore as investing. Those are long gone, where almost every coach in the NFL wasn't even a head coach in the NFL. Right? Half the coaches in the NFL were still coordinators when those moves were made. All they've done in recent times is sign Alex Mack. Ooh, a 2-year contract that was worth, I think, $4 million per. That's not a huge investment. That is putting a Band-Aid on a situation. And it's exactly what it was. They put a temporary Band-Aid on the situation and then didn't address it while they had the Band-Aid, and it still have not addressed it, because their attempt to address it was giving more money to a guy that sucks. And then doing 2 second-round picks, because they also, they did Aaron Banks, I guess a 3rd-round pick in Pooney. That's not addressing anything. Using a non-first-round pick, to me, is not addressing in any big way. They are moves. They have not done nothing, but the amount of investment that they've done over, say, the last 5 years has got to be the lowest in the NFL.
A second-round pick is a significant investment. I mean, Deebo Samuel was a second-round pick. A second-round pick is that's a starter. You draft a guy in the second round, he should start for you. I mean, Trent Williams is still here, so it's like you could say that was a long time ago, but he's still playing for them. Aaron Banks now, obviously, they're moving off of, but he was there since 2021. Center, you're right. I mean, it was the Alex Mack thing, and then they've tried to Band-Aid it. They did.
No, Alex Mack was the Band-Aid. It was, hey, here's this veteran who's not elite anymore, but he's good enough to buy us a year or two of time. And then in that year or two of time, they said, yeah, we don't have to do anything. Oh, he's gone? Let's sign this guy who couldn't even start elsewhere. Oh, he did halfway decent. Let's give him more money. That's not investing. That's a joke.
No, that's not a good handling of that position, to be sure. They drafted Pooney. Now, I think they've admitted they got lucky.
If a 3rd-round pick works out, I don't care what the position is other than kicker and punter, it's luck. You get to the 3rd round and you're just hoping it's somebody that can contribute something before their rookie contract is up.
And he's ended up good. So, yay. And then Colton McKivitz, we all know the Colton McKivitz thing. I don't get it, frankly. I don't get the Colton McKivitz thing. They have not tried to go out and find with enough urgency an answer at right tackle. But I disagree that they haven't invested anything in the offensive line. But they've
invested as little as any team in the NFL.
I don't know that to be true.
I
don't know what other teams have done on the offensive line.
I would bet there are at least 25 teams that have used a 1st-round pick on an offensive lineman since McGlinchey was drafted.
I have no idea. I couldn't tell you. Joseph Ernberg says Niners will never have a good offensive or defensive line because of them. Because of Lynch and Shanahan?
Yeah, I think that's what he's saying. Offensive line, yes. Defensive line, they've invested as much as any team in the NFL, and the problem is the investments that they made over the last 2 years have all fallen flat.
Right.
Javon Hargrave fell flat. I mean, that is a train wreck of a deal. That's as big of a train wreck as you get. He had 1 year of not producing and frankly being out of shape, and then a year where he got hurt.
And now he's going to be gone. And yeah, that was a disaster. Kinlaw, disaster. Drake Jackson, disaster. Solomon Thomas, disaster. That's my fear, is that, David Lombardi was like, oh, the Niners built an elite defensive line. No, they didn't. They inherited DeForest Buckner. They inherited Eric Armstead, and they fell into Nick Bosa at the number 2 pick, which was the most no-brainer slam dunk pick of all time. Everybody, and they traded for D Ford, which is fair. But anytime they've tried to find that guy on their own, Solomon Thomas, Javon Kinlaw, Drake Jackson, Ebenezer Ebukam, it's fallen flat. It has failed. So that scares me a little bit in terms of, can they build up a defensive line? I'm still waiting for Chris Kasarik to make one of these guys good. We keep hearing about how great Chris Kasarik is. They're paying him all this money. He's like highest paid defensive line coach in the league. What the hell, man? What are they getting for that money other than a lot of yelling?
Yeah, I told you I was ready to move on from him this offseason. I think it's time to change the defense, and instead they're running it back.
So. Daza is back. Thank you again for the super chat, Daza. He says, stats, that's 2 high round offensive line picks in 8 years. Look at how many high round picks the Eagles have made on the offensive line. I don't know how many high round picks have the Eagles made on their offensive line.
I don't know, because a lot of their offensive linemen, yes, they were high draft picks, but they're long time players. You know what I mean? They've been there a long time.
I'm trying to see. Let me see. Last year, I'm just taking a quick look at the Eagles draft. They didn't draft an offensive lineman before round 5 last year. 2023, they took one in round 3. The year before that, they took Cam Jurgens in round 2. They took Landon Dickerson in round 2 in 2021. And they didn't take an offensive lineman until round 6 in 2020. Andre Dillard was a first-round pick in 2019. Jordan Mailata was a 7th-round pick in 2018. Matt Pryor in 2018 was a 6th-round pick. So they've certainly done more high draft picks on linemen than the 49ers. That is true. And Lane Johnson, way back in 2013, was a first-round pick as well.
I don't know the exact. I was hoping Google would give me a really quick and easy answer, but
sure. You want to trust Google.
It's giving me different numbers. But I was trying to figure out how many O-line on average are drafted in the first round. I'm guessing it's around 8 or 9 a year. I think that's a pretty safe bet, because usually like 3 go in the top 10, and then you have like another 4 or 5 that go in the rest of the first round. And some years that it's been as many as like 14 or 15. I think we had just a few years ago. But my point being, even if it's like low of 7, since McGlinchey got drafted, you're basically getting to the point where the average team has drafted 2 in the first round over the last 7 years, because you're getting upwards of 60 players that have been offensive linemen that have been drafted in the first round. 49ers haven't done any. If you go to the second round, I'm guessing that balloons, and I'm going to have to look this up for next week's show. I'm guessing that balloons to, on average, almost 15 offensive linemen in the first 2 rounds a year, because the second rounds also gets littered with them. So you're talking about the average team in the first 2 rounds. Now you're talking about 3 or 4 offensive linemen averaged, and they've done 1.
But like, if you have Trent Williams, you're not going to draft a tackle.
Now you sound like Kyle Shanahan. We have Trent Williams. We don't have to invest shit because he'll make up for everything. That's been Kyle Shanahan's philosophy.
But like, I'm saying the Niners offensive line numbers might be lower because, like, if you have Trent Williams for years, you're not drafting an offensive lineman in those years. Now you need to take one. Yeah, but that's going to lower the number of offensive linemen that you take when you already have a good player there. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know what you mean, but how many years have they needed a right tackle?
Well, I've said they did not handle the right tackle spot properly.
Right. There should have been a first or second round offensive tackle at the very least over the last 3 years. They should have taken a damn stab at it at this point.
I will point out, like, everybody last year was ripping them. Oh, they didn't take Kingsley Suamataia. This team sucks. They don't know what they're doing. And the Chiefs did, and you let the Chiefs get this guy. And then he played, and how did he do? He sucked, and they benched him immediately. So, like, yes, we all want them to take an offensive lineman and rebuild the offensive line, and I get that. Now, it's a little different because you're at 11 this year as opposed to 31, but Like if they pick an offensive lineman in round 111, they will get universally praised after the draft. Great job. The guy could
regardless.
suck. Like, so like great. They would have gotten praise for taking Kingsley Sewell-Mataya last year, and then he would have been a terrible player. And then they would have been in this exact same spot with the offensive line that they are right now. So, I think people just want to see certain positions at the draft, and then they don't like care if the player is actually good.
I want to see effort. There's not been an attempt to address the situation. That's the issue I think everybody has with it. They haven't even tried. They have continued to go in front of the damn media even and say, Colton McKivitz is good. What are you talking about? Like, you're not only not addressing it, but you're lying to our face about it.
Well, the Colton McKivitz thing is not good. But, like, they did address with Pooney in the 3rd round. They got a good player.
And what have you said multiple times? What happened that allowed him to play? What were their plans for Pooney as a rookie?
Not much.
Yeah. It was, we hope he makes the roster.
But all I care about is that they get good players. I don't care if they do it in round 1. Like day 1 of the draft, we'll do a draft instant reaction show. And if they don't take a tackle or an offensive lineman, people are going to be big mad. Like big mad. And all I'm saying is just root for them to get good players. Do you care if they get an offensive lineman in round 1 or round 7? If he's good, who gives a crap?
What position would cause the biggest uproar? Everything's on fire, other than obviously kicker or punter, but that's not happening in the first round.
Kicker again.
Yeah. Not in the first round. But what position in the first round would cause all hell to break loose?
I think wide receiver, although you could argue
I think running back, where they go, oh, we gotta make sure we got somebody. Christian McCaffrey had injury and he's getting up there in age. This guy was just too good of an offensive weapon, and there's plenty of carries to go around. Like, I could see that being a possibility. That I think they would trade down in that scenario. But say they trade down to around 20 and then take a running back, all hell would break loose. Yeah.
I mean, it could be. Although I think a running back in the 3rd would almost make people more upset.
Because they've done it. Don't want to see that.
No, I don't think so.
Kyle Shanahan, you don't get to see the running back board. Like we don't want your opinion on it.
Not until later.
Or we do want your opinion on it, and whatever you say, we're going to reverse exactly what you said. Oh, that guy's number 1. Okay, he goes to the bottom.
Bazzyman says, is it Kyle's zone scheme, which is the limitation since it prioritized offensive line who is lighter and more athletic? Does Kyle need to change or adjust the scheme? I don't think so. I think he just needs to get better players to run the scheme.
Yeah.
There was a big thing in the book about how when he first got to the Falcons with Matt Ryan, he was like, my scheme is all that matters. Like, just do what I tell you and we're going to be good. And Matt Ryan had to basically teach him, like, no, dude, players over plays, Jimmys and Joes over X's and O's. And again, according to the book, Kyle Shanahan really learned that lesson. He and Matt Ryan had a big come to Jesus meeting, which may have been illegal according to the CBA, but it did happen. And they basically aired all the grievances, and Kyle came around. He was like, you know what? You're right. And that's why in 2016, everything clicked and Matt Ryan ended up winning the MVP. So I don't think it's a scheme issue. I think it's a get good friggin' players to run the scheme.
I think that is a vast majority of it. But there is something to be said there, and it's something that we have both complained about. The Kyle doesn't seem to adjust a whole heck of a lot to the players. And I do think that is a mistake. You bring players in, and then the players you have, you devise game plans and call plays based on what's best for them, especially the quarterback. You adjust to what your quarterback succeeds at. I think he has a little bit with Purdy. But I also think he's very stubborn in that regard. That he has the opinion of, it's not my scheme. The players just suck. They got to execute.
I think he does adjust to players, but it's the wrong players, right? Like he adjusted the scheme to Deebo to try and get Deebo more touches. Like they fed Deebo intentionally when some of the time they should have been feeding Kittle or Ayuk. Like,
right. So that wasn't, I mean, I guess that was playing to Deebo's strengths, but it was just get the ball in his hands. It wasn't saying, hey, what routes does he succeed at? Let's run a lot of those for him. You know what I mean? It was, let's do a screen and just get the ball in his hands, right? You know what I mean? Like,
succeeds at.
Well, I know, but you know what I mean? Like, it's not, what does this guy succeed at? Let's run more of it. It's, all right, how do we get the ball in his hands? And I'll call the plays that I like. That will get him open. You know what I mean? It's, I have a play that this player in that play gets open a vast majority of the time. I don't care what that route is. The player that I want to have the ball will play that role. Will have that route. And it doesn't matter whether that player is good at running that route. You know what I mean? I think I'm not saying that's 100%, but I think he does that a lot more than adjusting to what the players are. He says, here's the play. This is the guy that's likely to get open, and we want this guy to get the ball, so we're putting him in that spot.
I really want to see what this offense looks like with Deebo Samuel not on the roster, like permanently not on the roster. Not
Well,
like, oh no, Deebo got hurt and now we're scrambling. Like, I want to see it.
I said 3 years ago he was a crutch. It's been 3 years that I've been saying he's a crutch, and I wanted him gone.
So I would really, because honestly, like, I don't remember 2017 and 2018 enough, and they had such a deficiency of talent on the roster that I don't know how much we could even glean from that. But I would like to see it again. Daza says their big mistake was taking Javon Kinlaw over Tristan Wirfs. Yeah, certainly would love to see Tristan Wirfs.
And that Kinlaw pick was praised because what had happened that offseason.
Well, the Buckner trade, right?
Yeah. Oh, if they take a defensive tackle, it's going to be praised.
That's exactly
to
what.
To be fair, though, yes, in retrospect, it was a huge bust, but I think a lot of that one had to do with health that you can't really predict. Just like the Jalen Hurd draft pick was not a bad draft pick. That was a home run of a draft pick if he could have stayed healthy. He had the worst luck of all time when it came to health. The Javon Kinlaw, that knee injury just destroyed him. I do think that there was potential there for him to be really good, and the injury created a player that was a shell right away.
But he had knee problems in college.
That is true.
But that is the Kinlaw thing is a perfect example, right? Because they had traded Buckner and there was a huge hole and they addressed it in the first round. Everybody was like, great. And it just didn't work out. So I understand the desire to want to see them take an offensive lineman in the first round and say, hey, Colt McKivitz, your ass is on notice. You're in big trouble. We're essentially publicly saying and admitting that you're not that good. That would be certainly satisfying on day one of the draft. I'm there with you. But I care much more about getting good players. And now if they go through the whole draft and they don't take any offensive linemen, then I think you have...
Yeah, all hell will break loose.
Yeah, like you have real legitimate concerns and things that you can criticize them for.
If they get through day 2 and no offensive lineman has been drafted, yeah, they're going to be getting destroyed by national media and us here and fans. Because I would be getting through the first 3 rounds with no offensive lineman. I don't care what they do in free agency. Unless they sign a starting caliber center, which really there's only one great one out there, and a left guard. There's not a great tackle. I don't see them doing tackle in free agency.
Yeah, I would agree.
But if they did that, if they got 2 obvious starters and then they didn't address the tackle in the draft, I don't think it would be a huge uproar because people would be saying McKivitz isn't good, but you know what he is there, and they've upgraded so much more. Offensive line won't be the same problem that it was.
Yeah, for example, if they sign Drew Dahlman, who's 26 years old, they don't need to draft.
He should have a blank check. Make him the highest paid center.
We don't know if he's even going to hit free agency because the Falcons may tag him, so we don't know. But if they did that and they drafted a guard in like the 3rd round to replace Banks, and they left McKivitz alone, would you be super, super pissed?
I wouldn't be super pissed. If they get Dahlman, I'm not going to be super pissed with what else happens, right? Because they addressed the biggest eyesore on the offensive line. I mean, this center, the level of play that the 49ers had at center this last year is the worst I can remember ever seeing for the 49ers.
So bad. It
was horrendous. Yeah.
Bad.
So they would have just by addressing that, I feel like, okay, the offensive line is going to be considerably better than it was last year, even bringing back McKivitz. and getting Joe Schmo to play left guard because Banks didn't do crap last year either.
The big question is going to be, does Kyle go for the shiny toys, right? Does he get rid of the people that he needs to get rid of? In my opinion, Juice, Deebo. And does he also address the actual needs, or does he continue to stick with the shiny toys, the guys that score touchdowns? That, I think, will be the big question. And I think we'll be able to answer this question of, do you trust Kyle and John, much better after this offseason.
If I'm the 49ers, I will have already called the Atlanta Falcons and said, we will trade you Deebo Samuel for Dahlman so that they can franchise him and get him into a big contract. I don't see the Falcons doing that because what do they need? What do they need him for? You know what I mean? They got so many weapons there.
Yeah, but they don't use them.
Well, but doing Deebo Samuel screens means Bijan Robinson gets less. Like, no.
Well, they don't seem to have a problem with that. As someone that had Bijan Robinson on his fantasy team this year, they seem to be.
I've had him the last 2 years, and I would like to get one free shot at both their offensive coordinators because there's two different offensive coordinators. The fact, okay, we're getting off topic here, but I can't place his name. Algier. The fact that guy is getting 150 carries a season is one of the biggest travesties there's ever been. It reminds me of Derrick Henry early years when they were trying to split carries with the guy that came from New England, Deion something. I can't remember. Deion Lewis. They were doing a split carry, and they actually at one point tried to make Deion Lewis the bell cow because they didn't think Derrick Henry had it. And then Deion Lewis got injured, and they were forced to give Derrick Henry a ton of carries. And shocker, the big, huge guy does better when you give him more carries. They were giving him 5 to 10 carries for his first 2 seasons. That's what it reminds me of with Bijan. It's give him the ball and get out of his way.
Ryan Alloy, thank you very much for the super chat. That's very generous of you. Says they're either too picky with their ideal offensive lineman, light athletic run type, or they don't know how to evaluate the position. Either way, it has hurt them.
I think the first part is the more of the truth. I think it's a philosophy of just not spending a lot. And I think that they also, you could call it a crutch even. I do think that they've had a bit of a philosophy of, well, we have Trent Williams over there and he will make up for a lot. So we don't need to invest a lot there. But I also do think that they're a little stubborn in saying we need super light athletic offensive linemen. It's not so much about talent. It's about, do they fit our mold? Well, screw your mold. Change your offense if you need to. Get talent.
I think there's a high bar. I think it's kind of what Ryan said and what you were saying. Unless this guy is a Trent Williams level player, they're oh, we don't need to take him. And I think their standard for that is maybe too high. You just get a really good guy. It's okay if he's not Trent Williams on the other side. You don't need, of course you would like to have 2 of those guys, but that's not the requirement. The requirement is better than what you have. And if they're passing up guys that they know are better than what they have just because they're not Trent Williams, that's a misevaluation.
Yeah, I think there's some truth to that. It certainly seems like they have a philosophy of, if you're not an all-pro, then we'll spend nothing.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's all right, we can get an all-pro. Well, then we'll spend the money to bring that all-pro in. Oh, we can't get an all-pro. We're not going to spend any money there.
Let me put it to you this way, Levin. As I check the BetUS website, I'm looking at the Super Bowl odds to win Super Bowl 60, since we're talking about rebuilding the 49ers. The Niners are at plus 1,400. They are behind the Chiefs, Ravens, Eagles, Bills, Lions, and then there's San Francisco at plus 1,400.
They are third in the NFC, which I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it is the first time in 4 years they have not been the favorite in the NFC.
Yeah, that's the lowest they've been in quite some time. Obviously, you have to put the Eagles over them for sure. The Lions, I don't know. They lost both coordinators. There's some questions to me. I know they have a talented roster, but we will.
Yeah, I'm looking at some of these are a little. Obviously, people mistake betting odds for being 100% who they think is actually best and not having. They forget the factor that they're trying to get action.
Right.
that they think is favorable. But like for instance, the Packers having a considerable difference in odds to the Rams. Like I would put the Rams above the Packers. And yet the Rams are plus 2,800 and the Packers are plus 2,000. So it's a pretty sizable difference there.
Yeah, I don't know what's going to happen with Matthew Stafford, so I want to say that before.
That might be a factor in here. I'm assuming Stafford comes back.
But if you want to make a bet, please do it with BetUS. You can receive 150% on your first deposit and 125% on your second and third deposit up to $2,000 with code YouTube150. Certainly low for the 49ers. I wonder how much that'll change after free agency in the draft. I don't think Deebo getting traded would shift their odds at all, by the way. I don't think it would affect their number in any way, shape, form, or fashion.
No, and I mean, they might even go up if he's traded, to be honest.
Depending on what they get for him.
Right. Like if they get something of some actual value there, it might go up because they view that, a third round pick they would view as a bigger benefit. Or say they get a decent linebacker, somebody that can be that third linebacker in exchange for him. I think the odds would go up.
Frisbee Life on Twitch, shout out to the Twitch fam, says Lions actually having a healthy defense will be a bigger factor than losing the defensive coordinator.
I'll say this about the Lions. I'm not betting on them to win anything because the amount that they've lost in their coordinators is extremely hard and almost unprecedented that a team has been able to come out and keep the same level of play that they had.
Aiden Hutchinson, getting him back will be massive, but they are losing Ben Johnson. And I still, maybe it's just me not wanting to change my opinion, but I still don't believe in Jared Goff. I think Ben Johnson was doing a lot of work for Jared Goff, and he ain't there anymore. And now the Lions are going to have to face him twice a year in the division, too, on top of that. So it'll be really interesting.
And the defensive coordinator, what happens there?
I don't even remember if they hired anybody yet to replace him. I can't remember.
I don't think they have. I haven't heard it. Maybe they had to have.
Is it Kelvin Shepard? I think I'm just Googling. Yeah, that Kelvin Shepard apparently is going to be their defensive coordinator. He's been in Detroit for 5 years, I think. Okay, he may be great. I have no idea. I'm not saying he's not.
Well, that's why I wouldn't bet on him. I'm not saying that they will be bad. I'm saying I don't bet on complete unknown. They could be a 6-win team, or they continue to dominate.
Yep.
There's a huge thing there, and nobody has any clue.
And hopefully they're bad, because I want every other team in the NFC to be bad. I've said it a million times. I don't care if the Niners had the easiest road to a Super Bowl, that if the other team just forfeited and gave up, I wouldn't feel any worse about it. I just want that damn trophy.
Yeah. The Bears are one that scared me a little bit too. Like if Ben Johnson is really that good of an offensive mind, they're going to be a problem.
And yeah, I mean, then you give him somebody with the physical talent of Caleb Williams, that could be a problem, as the kids say.
Same with Minnesota could hit a new level if JJ McCarthy is truly a difference maker of a quarterback. Mm-hmm. And I mean, with the weapons they have there, watch out if JJ McCarthy is the real deal.
We will find out. Niners, of course, will see Ben Johnson next year when they play the Bears. A lot of new coaches on the Niners schedule. We'll have plenty of time to break that down. But that's going to do it for this show. Levin, thank you very much. Thank you to BetUS once again for sponsoring this video. If you want to sign up for BetUS, use promo code YouTube150. We got a long way to go this offseason, but don't worry. We will be here for you, breaking it down. We'll start to ramp up our draft coverage as we get closer to the combine. John Lynch is going to speak.
We got something coming up that actually we haven't really talked about. Media Madness.
Oh, that's true. The Media Madness. We got to get that.
We need to get that bracket made. Yeah.
Yeah. Throw in your suggestions now. Tweet at me at Stats on Fire. Tweet at Levin at Takes by 11.
Don't tweet. Go to Blue Sky. I don't look at Twitter anymore.
Same thing. There you go. I forgot about Media Madness. Thanks for the reminder. Enjoy the rest of your night, everybody.